small torch. Hello. It's very nice to see you all. So my practice encompasses painting in oils, acrylics, watercolour on a variety of surfaces, conventional, unconventional, expanded painting, some 2D, some 3D, also text, collaboration with others through performance, and more recently the use of moving image. I'm going to talk about two distinct bodies of work. The first one is a series of paintings called The Perfect Cannibal. This is one of them. And the second is called Embodiment. And although they're very different in one crosses many disciplines and the other is more deeply rooted within painting itself. They share common underpinnings in terms of the ideas and threads that are running through them. As I said, I will actually talk about this artwork later on, but just to give you a kind of a general sense of my interests, I'm particularly fascinated by a sense of movement in painting. I love that sense when you're looking at a painting that you feel like there's something inside it. So I'm clearly not a modernist. I love that sense of vitality, animation within a painting. There's a particular book by Isabel Graff. You may know her. She's an art theorist, The Love of Painting, and she talks so well about this sort of subjectivity within a painting, a special power to construct subjectivity. And it's one of the reasons I keep coming back as this tension between something which is ostensibly dead matter and something that has an animacy, a sort of vibrancy to it. My work also explores the fluid space between the touchable, visible world and the bodily interior and the labyrinths of psychological space. I see our bodies as not boundaried, but open and transmitting and receiving. So I'm interested in the flux between the conscious, the unconscious and the subconscious. I want the artist Emma Tolbert really sort of clarify those differences. Obviously the conscious is what we know of, we can recall easily. The unconscious, we may need to have our memory jogged, but we can usually recall it. And the subconscious are those elements within ourselves that we can't readily access, or only through fragments where they're not really accessible to direct recall, and the information is coded or fragmented and detached from their origins, and this is quite important to the work that I'm doing. So I grew up in the south of England, one of 3 children. My father was a teacher, very charismatic, athletic, clever, musical. He had a love of literature, film, photography, and all of that lives within me. But he was also unboundaried, unstable, sometimes violent, both in words and physically. My mother, once a nurse, was gentle and creative and attuned to the natural world, and she taught us the name of wild things, of plants and flowers. And that lives in me too, but she suffered and was often unavailable to us. And I realised, looking back through my life and my artwork, how I've been shaped by this exposure to both light and dark. The beauty and solace of art and nature entwined with hidden things, not spoken things of use. My work often carries the tension between the two. So this is a work that I made in the middle of my master's at Goldsmiths. It's an oil on canvas. It's this kind of size. And I was interested in the way the natural world is often used as a drop for fantasies, such as the lure of the tropical island. But I was also interested in puncturing the pictorial plane. And as you see, there's a black probably hard to see from there, but it's a black inflatable chair that floats on top of the water, and actually on top of the image in some ways. Or it could be a protrusion from underneath breaking through. But this was one of the early paintings where I started to explore the stippled mark as a way of creating the impression of weeds under the sea. As you know, the stippled mark is a percussive mark made by tapping the end of the bristle brush with its end repeatedly onto a surface. Little dots of black and white, light and dark, that builds to create a mat of arts, creating the illusion of grass, fir, moss, stone, trees. Dark and light, it relies on the dark pigment on the brush and the light ground. So this, I remember getting stuck at one point when I was doing my masters, and I just started, primed up like many of us would do when we get stuck. I primed up a number of small panels and started exploring this stippled mark. I call these the alpha beasts, the first beasts, using burnt umber oil paint, a small amount of glazed medium, allowing these marks to build into forms like small life forms. And then as I progressed, they got bigger. And this is one called Labrinodon, where it becomes a little more complex. So this particular one here is oil on aluminium, 90 by 100 centimetres. And it's a small ecosystem of sorts grown from the stippled mark of animate and inanimate elements. Moss, grass, fir, bone, rock. Maybe there's an element of growth gone wrong, of monstrosity. And it was about this time, and maybe it's because I'm studying, but I was very drawn into different types of philosophy, particularly Bergson and Deleuze, and through them a fascination for the discourse of the monstrous. The monstrous as being different from monsters. The monstrous is a space or a set of qualities, whereas obviously a monster is usually a hybrid being of some sort. This space is characterized by paradox and hybridity. It gives voice to things that don't have a voice. It crosses categories. The monstrous is to move beyond rigid principles of exclusion and categorization, and it's related to the counter-tradition in the art of the grotesque. So in the grotesque, as you will know, there's the imagery of the distorted, the fantastical, absurd, the hybrid, the unsettling, and the blending of the beautiful and the monstrous. Examples would obviously be someone like Hieronymus Bosch in the 15th century, Giuseppe Arcimboldo in the 16th century, and I have a, this is kind of a homage that I did to Arcimboldo. Goya in the 19th century, Francis Bacon, and someone who was very influential to me, H.R. Geiger, the Swiss artist, whose work was the inspiration behind Alien in the Ridley Scott film with the same name. The work sits at the intersection of the surreal, the grotesque, the futuristic, merging beauty with horror. And perhaps my fascination also stems from my own experiences of childhood, in that the monstrous could also be loved. This is a painting called Siren. It's part of a series of paintings called The Perfect Cannibal, and this is at the Fieldgate Gallery. It's actually curated by Laura White and Richard Livingstone, and Laura White has her work in the main gallery at the moment. Sorry, I'm juggling. Yeah, so maybe the best thing to do is give you a close-up of it. I like to give you the exhibition shot and get a sense of scale. And at this time I was very much working with this mats of stippled mark making. So I'd lay down a mat of stipples, I'd work into it. I would then it was kind of knitting together the painting. One area of sensation would develop into another area of sensation. In this particular painting, I already decided I wanted this central figure of a kind of a monstrous form connected into the landscape. It was also at this time that I was really exploring trying to set up a kind of perceptual movement in the paint mark, so that when you were looking at it, the surface had a kind of a febrile moving quality. It's really, really hard for you to pick that up from images, because everything just gets so flattened. And actually the title of this series, The Perfect Cannibal, it stands for a particular movement of life and then death. It's like how do you say it, the Ouroboros? I've forgotten how you say it, but the snake, you know, that eats its own tail. It's similar. You know, a cannibal eats humankind, other humans. A perfect cannibal would eat itself. So it's this sort of sense of trying to generate imagery that sort of grows and collapses, grows and collapses. Now this one's called Beyond Erigena. Erigena was a particular, John Scotter's Erigena was a particular Neoplatonist philosopher, theologian, and I was fascinated by his work on the monstrous, and on monsters in particular, sitting at the intersection of the normal world and the divine. That there was nothing for him in the material of this world that could not be accommodated. This is called Beyond Erigena. It's a slightly smaller work. Behind Erigena, it's oil and aluminium, 37 by 34 centimetres. And I think this demonstrates nicely the use of wipe back that I use quite a lot. The wiping back as a kind of doubling, in the sense that in wiping back it provided the form, but it also creates this kind of oscillation of a void and also a form coming forwards. So I did a series of these kinds of these heads. So I'll just flick through some of these. This is a smallish work on paper, where I'm trying to think about how I bring in colour. It's one could say a sort of post-apocalyptic science fiction painting, bringing on those particular aspects, but also for me thinking through notions of heaven and hell. Over time, I started to work with the gesture. The previous way of working was, I would call it emergent, in that it builds up, and you move it around through compression and smearing to find beginnings of imagery, and it's that kind of imagery that grows and grows and grows until you kind of grow the painting. And I had a real discomfort about using the kind of very lyrical gesture, but I wanted to kind of free myself of a particular technique where I felt very kind of boxed in. So this painting is called Cyclorama Red Tree. The cyclorama are the kind of backdrops you see in film onto which the imagery is projected. And I was laying down a sort of a bright cyclorama, if you like, and then working on top of it using gesture, stipple mark, and so forth. I think it's also interesting that this painting was made about 2016, but at the time when it got showed, here it is in the Charlie Smith Gallery in London. It was part of a show called Words That Transform, Vibrate and Glow, 13 paintings inspired by the lyrics of Nick Cave. And although this wasn't painted, I wasn't inspired to paint it through Nick Cave. It actually really resonated, and I happen to really love the artist Nick Cave, so I was very happy to be in the exhibition. But at this particular time, I don't know if you remember it, in 2020, before COVID really got going, was the year of the horrendous wildfires in California. And I think this really picked up on that sense of charred wood and that hellish red light. I don't know if you remember those images in the press. There's a close-up. A sense of kind of really explosive energy within it. And this is part of the series. This has, I think, quite a different feel to it. This is Cyclorama Green Tree, whereas really playing around with the gesture slap bang in the middle, right at the forefront. For me, it has a kind of dancing quality about it. It also, I guess, it kind of acts a bit like a ravine down the middle as well. And then this one, it just has a working title of Shaman. It's very small, it's this size, and often I work very large, or I like to work very, very small, primed aluminium. In this small painting, I wanted to evoke the animacy of the natural world, its power, how it evolves and how it grows, and also, you know, my very deep reverence and love for its power and beauty and healing powers, primal black matter. So I think I'll stop here in terms of this particular run of painting, move on to the second artwork that I wanted to discuss or to talk about, which is called Embodiment. In many ways, when I talk about it, you'll see it feels very, very different to the earlier work, but it carries a lot of the same points of interest. And actually, what I'll probably do is quickly go back in time to 2014 to an exhibition that I was involved in the Baltic project space. I don't think Baltic 39 exists anymore. I think it closed in 2021. But here I was thinking about what I thought of as an electrically charged painting. So at the time I was using plastic, which actually I could never do now. But I have the shame of having made work on plastic. The idea of it was that it was this kind of body of a painting which was self-clinging to the wall. It wasn't hung as such, it was static electricity. And in a way it was kind of like this electrified body that had to be, you know, recharged or defibrillated on a regular basis by the invigilators who had these gloves which could kind of rub them up. Or as someone very kindly said, fluff them up, as if fluffing. And, but slowly it would collapse over the period of the month down onto the ground. So this is just to set this next body of work, rather than you thinking about, oh, this seems like a really sudden change. And actually I have a body of work that works in quite extended ways. So embodiment, this particular piece of work, the activity of time is really, really important. And I love this quote by Eva Hoffman that really shows the kind of loops of subjective time rather than chronological time, which moves from A to B. The way we feel time often is that the past comes into the future, or even within the present, time can move in vastly different ways. So in 2018, I really wanted to get to grips with the trauma, really, from my past that was haunting me throughout my life. And I went to a therapist and I was asked to start drawing. as an attempt to try and access these memories as a first step. And it was really interesting because this is one of them, actually because I had drawn in this way, probably not since my degree, that I found it really difficult to know how I would do that. And also I've been painting the way where the imagery emerged. I wasn't used to kind of depicting something or trying to depict something. But to begin with, I made these small drawings. There's many. There's a vast number of them. These are just a few. Trying to express or to capture something in my experience. And then over time, rather than myself and my body, I began to draw those of my parents and the people that were there in my childhood, trying to bring these energies together. And so this is larger than life size. And there was something quite interesting that, having seen them laid out on the floor, I realised that I needed to address these figures in a very personal way. And I needed them to stand in front of me. So I cut them out. And these are some other ones. And the collection of them grew and grew, and these are just some of them. I was in the Waterside studio in Lewes, Waterside building, and they had a really large studio that no one was using. So I was very lucky to have this space. I also wanted to show the back of them because it was really important, the decision around what I was going to use for the support of them. And I thought of many different things, but actually in the end the bamboo cane was the most useful, most ready to hand, universally used as a kind of structure. And it meant that I could take it apart and fold everything up if I needed to. So it's a very practical decision. And at this time I realised that when I cut out the figures and they stood before me, somehow they were untethered from my past. They felt like they had different things to say. And I really wanted to know what those things were. And so I asked a group of dancers from Free School Dance in Brighton. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they're all dancers who are 55 and above. And at one point I joined some of their classes, and so I knew them. And it was also very important to me that I found people who had lived within the transit of time and of memory to work with me and work with these embodiments, as I call them, these figures, to find out what they had to say, what their narratives were. So I invited them to the studio in 2022, and there were a great many that I made, but actually only some of them really qualify for what I call embodiments, which is that they embodied fragments of memory, memories of people, particular qualities. So I wasn't at this time quite sure exactly how the work was going to be made. So I asked the dancers to spend some time just getting to know the embodiments and to play. I remember feeling this sense of discomfort that I was working with dancers and I'm not a choreographer. I didn't quite know where we were going, but then I had to just remember that the way my art practice works is that I don't know where I'm going, that I allow things to evolve, and then at a certain point I get a sense of clarity. But it was a deeply sort of uncomfortable time. So initially, when I asked them to participate, I think we all thought that I was going to be developing a performance or a dance. But as the participants spent time with the figures, what emerged was a sensitive and genuine attempt to communicate with the embodiment, and maybe themselves or the past. It was not something that could be scripted or choreographed, rather it was an exchange, an act of attunement. I met with each participant and their embodiment individually for a couple of sessions without being in the presence of the others, and I'm not sure if I actually said that they picked their own embodiment, the one that they felt most close to. And my role was to hold a safe and confidential space where the participants would not be interrupted for what was quite sensitive and emotional work. There are some parallels here with therapeutic practices such as puppet therapy and drama therapy, psychodrama, that do involve puppets or figures to externalize inner thoughts, emotions, or subconscious conflicts. And being aware of this, it was important to me that I got to know the participants, that they also knew their own boundaries, that they didn't do things they didn't want to do, and they didn't go deeper than they wanted to go. That was very important. The other big question was, what were these figures that sat somewhere on the borders of artwork and puppet and a prop? They were to be used and touched and not only looked at. A friend suggested I look at the work of Tadeusz Kantor, artist and theatre director of the Polish avant-garde, and his use of objects in performance such as the Dead class. The objects that the performers used and held were not regarded as props but memory objects, charged with personal, historical, or emotional significance. This really resonated with me and helped me create the guidance that I gave to the participants before we began. So this is the guidance that I gave them. That the embodiment is real, but of a different order experience. They cannot move or speak, but they feel your touch and hear your voice. The invitation is to attempt to attune to your embodiment and sense beyond its two-dimensional surface to what it might say or speak to in you. What do they want to say? Explore not only your response to how the figure looks, but also the materiality of their body and skeleton. They're not puppets or extensions of your body that can be inhabited. Both your body and theirs retain their integrity and autonomy. You are you, and they are they. So individually, I worked holding space for them and watching the process. And what unfolded before me was very, very beautiful. Each person brought their own humanity, experience, and memories to the process of communicating with their embodiment. The passage of time, human ability to connect and empathize and form connections with others, with even after all what is a paper image of a person. It spoke of touch, both of the body and the eyes. And on a very personal level, I found the tenderness and concern showed towards the embodiments that were, after all, the outward expression of disturbed parts of myself, deeply touching, and I found myself consoled. And with the permission of the participants, we decided to film the exchanges in the project space here at the Phoenix Art Space. And I was really lucky that my daughter Kezia Feinson was studying documentary filmmaking at that time at the National School of Film and Television, and she was able to borrow lights and camera. She was able to shoot the film. She was my technical support and source of expertise.
Nadine, 10 minutes,
yeah? Yeah. Okay. I'm getting there. Just showing this because that's my daughter Kezia on the right there with camera. And these are, so we decided to film their exchanges. And these are some stills. And in a minute I'm going to show a trailer, because the full film's about 45 minutes long, and it's made up of about sort of five short films, about 4 minutes each. But I'll show you the trailer, and then I've picked out just one of the short films to show you afterwards. Just want to say that this was very much a collaborative work with Jill, Maya, Michael, Annie and Penny, the participants, with my daughter Kezia Feinson Geoff, who shot the film, with Andy Salvi, who was also a student at the NFTF, who did the editing. And I had the very great pleasure of working with sound designer David Thomas on the soundtrack that accompanies it. Okay.
Michelle, can you put the lights on, please? Oh, sorry. Thank you.
Thank you. And if there are any questions, please do ask.
Questions? When Nadine, when you're making the paintings,
At the beginning,
you explained about the kind of the working with the surface, but was that where was the imagery coming from beyond that? Was there anywhere particular? I mean, I can see landscape and. But I just wondered if there was anything that you wanted to share about that.
One of those things where you're working with this kind of imagery that you're beginning to get little sort of, when you move stuff around, particularly with the stipple, you get these odd distortions and things with the surface, and imagery would start to appear, like I might see a tree or a form or something. I mean, it's one of those things when you're using paint that you know, it reacts in the same way that matter does in the natural world. So if you're using solvents, or you're using pressure, or you're using drip or anything like that, you're going to end up very often with imagery that looks like something in the natural world. And also with the stipple as well, it's really interesting because it has a kind of confusion of scale within it, because when you have these sorts of dots, it can also look like grass, and it can look like moss, and it can look like a mountain. You get this sort of confusion of scale. But I think also, just for me, you know, the natural world has always been a kind of a cipher for me in many ways. So apart from Siren, where you had this big sort of monstrous figure in the middle, very often I have absolutely no idea where the painting will take me. Obviously it sort of ends up in a similar territory. But yeah, so it's sort of a mix of the natural world and also I guess, you know, your own kind of subconscious or conscious coming through. Yeah.
Do you think that could lead you anywhere? Or are there limits?
I think there are limits within the technique itself, and partly because you're reliant on pigments that are quite dark but will also become quite transparent as well. So that final painting that I was showing, which I called Shaman, was made with indigo, which is sort of has a sort of its undertones. It has a really nice kind of bluish undertone to it. So I work with these kinds of pigments. But at one point I was finding that I was kind of really boxed in within a particular, within that technique, and trying to find ways to work with colour, for instance, where you haven't got that kind of contrast, which is what I was reliant on to create the imagery. Is that what you're saying, or were you thinking more about
you said
what the imagery could be?
It would take you into kind of natural things like moss and grass, etc., etc. But did it take you other places, or did you restrict?
I don't think it was restricting. I think it was more.
And did you restrict yourself from going other places?
Not particularly, no, because I mean sometimes it would form kind of archaeological shapes, buildings, all sorts of things. But I guess my interest was within the natural world and this sort of flow between different kinds of materiality. Different materials within the natural world, but which also obviously we find the animate and inanimate within ourselves as well. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. Hi. So you were saying with your process that you go into these things and you don't really know what's going to come up. And with the painting, obviously you had that stippling, so you had this sort of part of the process that could sort of push you in that direction. But with the paintings and embodiment of the figures, how did that, when you started painting, did you have an idea of what you were going to paint? Like, how did that process begin?
With the embodiments?
Did you have sketchbooks? Had you already created them? Or did you just start painting and see where it took you?
I just start painting and see where it takes me.
Yeah. And did we think, was there
I'm trying to, I mean, with those particular works, with the small works which had a sort of central body, which was me, I'm trying to translate feelings, I guess, and memory into image in some way. With the larger ones, again, it was more about the kind of drive to depict something that was kind of coming through as in a kind of very feeling somatic, a lot of somatic energy within the body. You know, the body was telling me where it was going, wanted to go. So I would say to myself, for instance, with the one that Michael called Big Daddy, the one that I was showing in the film there, I'd made the decision I was going to draw my father, but I wasn't quite sure what was going to happen. Or in the one that Penny called Mother, I didn't know what it was going to look like, but it's more of that kind of somatic drive, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Did you?
Yeah, I suppose, I mean, I know you've been working on the shaman paintings more recently, and I can see that both sets of work are around blurring those boundaries or pushing those parameters between different borders, if you like. I'm just suppose I'm curious as to whether you think you might, have you completed the embodiment series? Do you think you might go back to that, or are you coming more back to the paintings of, for example, the shaman series?
I mean, I saw the embodiment, the film that I made of it, as part of a much wider work of three-dimensional figures interacting in different ways, and that isn't something that I've gone on to do. I might do, it's still there, it's still bubbling away. But it does require space. Yeah. But I kind of flick in on it. This is how I work. I will work on one area, and then I will often work on another area. And again, it's this sort of, you know, some people work progressively, but I don't. I tend to go back, pick something up, come forwards, and I'm always working like this. Hi.
Hi. Thanks. Thanks for sharing. I really enjoyed seeing the stuff. I wanted to ask you a very personal question, so please feel free to not answer. Out of the embodiment, knowing that you've drawn from what I'm hearing, you've drawn from an unconscious through this kind of somatic process to an expression of yourself in some form, and then you've engaged in this collaboration with the dancers. I'm curious, although just want to say, there's a part of me that enjoyed it, but part of me also felt like a voyeur watching that. I'm wondering what difference it has made to you on a personal level in your relationship, not just to the artwork, but also what it is that was being embodied, that is not being expressed in a verbal language, but in a kind of visual, expressive movement language. What has, if anything, what has changed through that engagement with the dancers?
I mean, for me personally,
yes.
Yeah. I mean, that was the surprising thing, that I wasn't expecting to feel as emotional as I did when I watched them. And it was partly, there was a generosity and a tenderness. And not all of that got captured on film, because they had some exchanges that were beforehand. And there was something for me about seeing, you know, a parent, you know, someone that had a very complex relationship with, being handled tenderly, being cradled, being cared to, that really touched me deeply, and was quite, in a strange way, consoling. The act of doing this, even though it wasn't the purpose for me, actually I found it a process of untethering from the past. It was really, really healing, actually, to use that kind of language. But that wasn't the purpose of it. And actually the dancers, Penny, for instance, who worked with Mother, who, it's difficult because you haven't seen all of them, but you know, she decided to go very, very deep into it, and to really use the image as a kind of portal to her relationship with her mother, and again, that was kind of very therapeutic. But you know, it's a wobbly line. I'm not a therapist, and I'm very aware of these different types of therapeutic approach. So it's not something I feel I could engage in with the general public in this way. And people have asked me, but actually I'm not sure that that feels quite right.
So does that mean you do or don't want to share more of that part of the journey in what it is you're producing? Or is there a part of you that would rather just say, okay, I step away from this now, these emotional relationships that I'm going through, and I'm now creating a piece for you to interpret or receive?
I think with me it's always going to be bound up with myself and with the other, but that's the same as the painting. They may ostensibly be about other things, and they are, but they're also me. They're also psychological pieces. So, think about these figures, probably the expressions on them, because they have faces, that people often tell me stories afterwards about things, and for me that's very much part of the work, is what happens afterwards, because it kind of creates a kind of community of care, not just with me, but how I look after the people that are involved in this work. They're creating their own kind of community of care, and then other people come in as well, maybe who are seeing the work in a different setting. Yeah. Is that, yeah.
I'd like to close some comment, if I may. This is just a comment on how that opens up a different kind of conversation, a non-verbal conversation, which I appreciated, so thank you.
Thank you.
Got a really mundane thing to say, which is that the bar shuts in like 3 minutes. Anyone wants to?
Well, thank you, Nadine. That's fantastic.
Hi, my name is Geoff Hands. I'm here in my studio in Brighton. Been at the Phoenix, I think, for about 6 or 7 years now. Lived in Brighton since 1981. Think of it as my home, where I paint. I had a career in teaching, mostly at Northfoot College in Worthing. I'd been travelling to various places to make what are called psychogeographic drawings, which is drawing and walking at the same time. And painting for me is perhaps a bit like making up as you go along, improvising, which might be very much a jazz kind of thing to do. But I find once I've started painting, a kind of rhythm sets in. So at the moment, first of all, I have 2 projects on the go, really. The main one is working with a musician. So I'm making works to accompany his music, but it's something I haven't done before. So we've been doing this on and off for about a year. It feels like it's taking off.
I sent him a video I'd made of one of the sketchbooks, and he used that as a visual score just to work from when he started to compose. After Tobias had said, could he work on something with me, we went to Hidedown.
So after having done that walk and done some drawing, it came back to me that was a space where I had taken students before. I think I associate that hill, that walk, just with that previous career in teaching, really. Working for an organisation that I loved very much. So to have a connection with this geographical location near to the college I think that was probably part of the decision making. If I go out into the landscape to make a drawing, what I'll often do is use a concertina book, which means I've got to fill 32 pages instead of 1. The drawing responds to the walk. It takes away worrying too much about the accuracy of the drawing, what I'm seeing and feeling and sounds that are around about. Sometimes I'll just write down words. They look like a poem, albeit very much an improvised piece of text. The next stage is to take that book back to the studio and sometimes work further into that book. What do I like about art? I think from the point of view of just myself, it's the challenge, and this may sound odd, but the sheer difficulty of, in my case, making paintings and drawing. I was thinking about, well, if there was no art, a pretty weird world. We obviously need to make art and to see art. It's a challenge. If it wasn't a challenge, it wouldn't be worth doing, really. I often don't enjoy painting. I mean, I don't come down to the studio as a form of entertainment or to have fun. Some people might talk about the creative process in that way. I think once one is into the activity, and you don't want to be anywhere else or doing anything else.
Okay, well, as I've already said, so showing that short film that Laurie made about me and about my practice, and that's working outside and bringing that work back into the studio, and that thing called studio practice, which perhaps I'll come back to a little bit later on. But I found in preparing this PowerPoint, thinking, I'm not sure what I've got to say. I think I could show my latest project perhaps. So perhaps the work with Tobias, the itinerarium show that we put on in the project space here just a few weeks ago, was the thing to talk about. And I was thinking, well, does one go back to the beginning, as it were, into the more a chronological talk about this and that, etc., etc. And I found I was torn between the two, of the talk about recent or talk about the past and do the chronological thing. And I was reminded that, in a sense, it's all one, it's kind of one big period. And in fact, in the previous discussion, there was the quotation, I forget the name now, something about time and memory and our experiences. And it's almost as if it's one massive moment in some way. Anyhow, I put this slide in of the flyer for the exhibition that we had here, and seeing this list in the middle of walking, drawing, painting, music, text. And I thought, they're all kind of things that I do. I mean, I don't write music and I can't play an instrument, but from time to time, something relating to music will pop up in the work or the ideas that I've got. So maybe I thought I should just take walking, drawing, painting, music, text as giving me the structure, not necessarily in that order, and perhaps a bit muddled up as well, or music intermittently cropping up in that. One of the special things about the recent show with Tobias was he, as well as composing the music, it's released on Bandcamp, and people could come to the show and literally have the music in their ears. That earphones were provided for visitors. He also had a CD made, so it's just nice to see one's images on some artwork as well. And I've been making artwork for a Brighton-based composer, Barry Mills, and 10 of my pieces have appeared on covers of his. And the joke that Barry and I often make is people might say, how did you know each other? And I can say, this was someone else's idea. We were channel engineers for the BBC, which of course we used to be Brighton Borough Council before the names were changed, and we were road sweepers. And the gut is what we might call the gutter. It's called the channel, technically. So we were channel engineers for the BBC. That's my funny anecdote of being a road sweeper. And I then went and did my teacher's training course. But anyway, well, his record company, Claudio, make very high quality sound-wise recordings of they just released or re-released an album with another artwork of mine. So I'm just trying to get some musical connections in here. So that literally came out this week, I think. But writing, I love to write, and in fact my BA was in fine art painting in the 70s, when many of you of course weren't born. But when I did my MA, some years later, generously supported by Norfolk College, I was the foundation course leader at the time, but they gave me time off and paid for me to do an MA course. In fact, I did a creative writing at Sussex, which is a fantastic thing to do. And most of the writing material that I had available, which wasn't a great deal, but actually it's my studio notebooks, and I still keep them, and I'm currently typing them up. I've typed 31,500 words at the moment. I think it's about another 8,000 or 9,000 to go. Probably take me another 2 years. But I just love to write and jot things down, and so that's on the computer screen of using Word and sizing everything to 25%, I think it was, and just doing a sort of screen grab of that. So, as well as being somebody who essentially is a painter, I sort of rediscovered, actually I'm doing all this other stuff as well, so say, by being invited to give this talk, it made me stop, as it were, and look back and see what's going on. So as I complete each journal, a journal could take a year to fill, 18 months, or I think there's one that took me 4 years, because I don't write every day, or even every week. And I just found that, getting your thoughts down on paper, and I found recently as I was typing up, I think I'm up to 6 or 7 years ago, trying to catch up, reading things I thought, sure I didn't think that 10 years ago. So it's been quite good for self-confidence, I suppose. So the journals are underway, and I've always been interested in Brighton and Peter Schmidt's box of strategy cards, which in fact David Bowie, one of my superheroes, used for writing lyrics and creating music. And you out of this pack of cards, you pick one out, and they're designed for the music recording studio as advice of what to do or what not to do. There's a really interesting website that has all of this information on it. But from writing my own studio diaries, occasionally I would come up for my own painting studio strategy, and I think this one was from about 8 months ago. Funk is junk, and I think I've seen something on Instagram. There's a comedian called Funk or something, isn't it? I don't know. The word came into my head, but twisting around the notion of thinking into funking, and maybe anything you want really. But I found that the diary has sort of morphed into my own painting studio strategies, for which I have an Instagram account that has a lot of those on there, and I keep thinking I should get these printed, but perhaps one day. The idea, just to give basic advice, rather than in the music recording studio with Brian Eno or whoever, I was thinking in the painting studio, and actually these cards. When I first started I sort of take them seriously. I made an initial set, and I remember having a session with the fine art degree students at Norfolk and talking about it with them and seeing if they worked or not, which I think they did, but the feedback was really good, which gave me the confidence just to do more really. And I showed it to some foundation students who didn't take off on it so much, so maybe it's more just being a little bit older, those degree students seem to get into it much more. So I will. So on the iPhone, there's this little writing app. You can type things up and then you can store them. So for the last 3 or 4 years, I've been using that as well, and just have that musical feed throughout. I thought, well, I'll put the one in that quotes Mick Jagger and Keith Richards. I see a red door. I want to paint it black. With, I suppose relating that to my painting, or anyone's painting, is you don't have to copy what you see. And, you know, if you see a red door, you can paint it any colour you wish. It doesn't even have to be black. And this is quite a recent card that I came up with a few months back. And I was wondering about what would an acoustic version of a painting be like, or vice versa. And the cards don't have to give the answers. Every individual can have their own answer for this. On the subject of, well, there's text on the original list and writing, I also found that my interest in writing developed into writing about exhibitions, which I think it partly started from my eldest daughter having an exhibition in Italy, I think it was Naples, and whatever had been written was kind of slightly wrong. It got some of the facts wrong, so I sent an email afterwards thinking how stupid, embarrassed my poor daughter, and pointed out these few errors, and it would be better written this way, just the odd word. And the editor of this website, Conceptual Fine Arts, got back to me and said, yeah, I'll change it. And would you like to write something? So that started off, what's been a few years now, about 14, 15 years of writing art reviews as well. And that was Conceptual Fine Arts, so I don't write for anymore. There's AbCrit, which sadly is it's still online, but AbCrit was originally Abstract Critical, and they changed it to AbCrit. I don't know why. But sadly, yeah, the guy who's running it, he died, I think, 2.5 years ago now. So AbCrit, I'm hoping it'll be revived again. And this is a review I wrote of one of the hard painting shows that was here at the Phoenix. And again, yeah, that in preparing for this and that, looking back what's been written, I discovered I've written 25 reviews and published them Phoenix-based exhibitions, which I don't feel as though I have. Instant Loveland, a good friend of mine in London, he makes fantastic art. He's a writer as well. John Bunker, and I wrote one article for Instant Loveland, and in fact it's the only review I've written where I had doubts about the claims given to the work of a particular artist. I thought I pronounced her name incorrectly, but Beatrice, I think it's like Medhadeth, or Midhays, that said that, and I didn't really see her as an abstract ancient. Somehow I had to comment on that, and so yeah, just the one article for Instant Loveland, and the saturation points. The two guys who are on that, they like to come to the Phoenix and see the shows here. But Rupert Hartley, who's a Brighton-based artist, did a show in New Haven not so long ago. So yeah, so some articles are on saturation point as well. Most of my articles are on ruminations. It's actually fine art ruminations, but having established that, I thought I'd rather just call it ruminations. And it's a recent-ish article on the June Nelson's exhibition that was here as well. Some of her work, which is out in the corridor, but I'll come back to that later. But this thing about writing and then text and words, and bring it back to my visual arts interest, which in a sense is much more than the writing really. And some work I did in, I think, the first COVID lockdown. There's a period where we could, I can't remember, we could go out for 15 minutes, a half an hour each day. And I remember going out and thinking, I'm just going to photograph words that I see. So when I go on an urban walk, I'm somehow drawn more to the texts that I see in that space. Whereas you saw at the edge of the earlier video, if I'm in the countryside, I'm drawing the landscape, etc. So, I mean, quite why my response is different in an urban space, I have no idea. But anyway, so in early days of COVID, I was taking photographs and putting those together, and then bringing the text back in, which was the words. Being actually very straight with myself. I will present the words or represent them, either I type them out, but in the strict order that I've come across the words. I didn't let myself change the words around, maybe to make more sense, or taking words out that just didn't need to be there. And putting the text, the typography together with the imagery. So and that's a few years ago, 2020, but I feel like it's a project I've only just started really. There was something I did where it was with a group of students on a college trip to New York, and I set a project for the students to just photograph wherever they saw paint on the ground, which isn't always yellow stripy lines. It could be a spilt paint or whatever. I didn't put one of those images in, but just it's something fascinating, maybe about finding paint in the environment as a painter, or as a writer, finding words in the environment as well. But as I mentioned, COVID, in one of the, I think it was 2 or 3 lockdown periods now, I can't remember what we had, but making for what was called Brighton in Somerset, and an organisation there, but it must be on Instagram, for people to make artworks and to post them in. And so I using, the Phoenix Open that year was cancelled for obvious reasons, couldn't have big crowds coming into the building. So I thought I'll try and recreate my own little Phoenix Open weekend on some bags that I can hang on these hooks that my daughter was using in her artwork, so I borrowed a couple from her to make these. But I'm actually going to, but again, it's this text coming into the work, which I'm feeling is something I haven't fully explored yet. So rather than just talking about this is what I've done, blah blah blah, I feel with the text, this is something I've touched upon, but there's a lot more to do yet. And then in searching through the images, the slides on the computer at home, I had a look at some work that was from when I did my fine art degree at College of Art and Design in Farnham in the 70s, and I think this is from the latter part of the second year, and I just loved collage, and I've always just loved the early part of Cubism, particularly Braque and Picasso, and the still lives that they made. And I'd find that some of my work, it would be echoing, because as a student, kind of copying or being highly influenced by other artists' work, which one can continue to do. I'll come back to that later on in the talk. But just fascinated. I don't even know where this work is now. It's quite a small piece, probably not much bigger than A4, I think. But just picking up bits and pieces off the floor in the studio at the college, and it was made in 18th of April 1978, the second year, and in fact I think one of the last pieces of work I made on the course at Farnham, it's my unsuccessful application to the Slade. Obviously the works come back, and so I glued that onto the back of a chocolate box, and that partly related to, probably don't hear it so much now, people like chocolate box covers, nice pretty landscapes painted on, well reproduced and printed on chocolate boxes, which was very much a thing in the 60s and 70s and 80s. Perhaps not so much now. So I made my own chocolate box. That's the bottom of the chocolate box, picking up stuff from around the studio. I love making collages as well, and I can be quite. I get very obsessive, I think, and so throughout 2016, I made a collage every day. This was at home. My studio used to be in the house as well, and virtually all of the collage materials, it's just the stuff that comes into our kitchens that should end up in the waste disposal for recycling. I thought, well, I'll keep some of this stuff and make collages with it. So the discipline of making something every single day with the collages. So I've got, and it's using one of these concertina books from C. White's shop in Partridge Green. Highly recommended. But and printing the date on at the bottom of the page. So there's a structure there, and one has to keep doing it, and played around the possibility of perhaps making paintings from these. I make one or two, but I was more satisfied with these as collages. So that's the image purposely on its side of half of the books. It was 12 for the 12 months of the year in the kitchen at home. And I could get a photograph of everything at that time. But again, one thing to make, I've always loved collage, and just got obsessed as someone who listens to music. I think, what's the one thing I love doing the most? It's almost more listening to music than painting sometimes. So one can combine the two, and I made a series of works where I just cut out of magazines some sort of superheroes. So Queen Joni Mitchell appears in this, and I used these. You see it in the following slide of catalogue covers for a show at the 19A Gallery up in Hollingdean, and a show called In the Garden, which I tend to think of, if we go out into the landscape, it's one massive garden really, and actually even in an urban setting, in the city centre, it's a garden or it's landscape that have buildings, roads, etc. built on top of it. But the title In the Garden for the show is a Van Morrison song, quite an old one, I think, and it also linked to going to a friend's house in Wales, and they have a lovely big garden, and I'd walk around the garden and make drawings as well. So going back to the show, I made these catalogues, so printing onto A4 and folding in half, so that A5 size catalogues. So that's just a few of them. And so it's Neil Young's in there somewhere. So but yeah, this fascination with mixing up the painting with other sources, whether it's text or images of people, and to that notion of come to a little bit later on, well, like spirits in the forest or spirits in the woodland, and imaginatively speaking of people who might be there, and because I just love music, I can imagine it. Maybe they'd be my pop stars, as it were, from particularly listening to music in the 70s, I guess. So I put this in more to remind me that the reason I went to art college, Shrewsbury School of Art, was I just wanted to be David Bowie's album cover designer, and then sort of discovering that actually I just love painting. So David he lost me then, and I just had to carry on with the painting itself. But I had this sort of initially this sort of vision of vague idea even of being a graphic designer, and so I just wonder if that's just stayed with me a little bit. I love an excuse to make a catalogue for a show, and I'll just make them, and I give them away. So the recent show here, not sure if there's a slide of that in later, but yeah, just the making of something. That was my payment. This is a large oil painting, I think more or less the size that you can see it. And I mean, the thing that I love doing the most is using oil paint, which years ago I did a lot of them with working at home and children arriving, and stopped using oil for a few years just because of the odours in the house. Through getting a studio at the Phoenix, now I could get the oil paint out again and leave all my mess out. Oil's put in the lots up cover, that hits inside at the end of the day. And this was a painting where I worked from one of those collages, and in fact PJ Harvey, you won't see it, PJ Harvey's in here with a saxophone on the left-hand side somewhere, I think. But in the making of the painting, she's disappeared. There's a collage somewhere in the drawer up in the studio. Again, I'm purposely going backwards and forwards in time, because I just see, it came up in Nadine's talk. Actually, there's a quotation, wasn't there, about time and how it's past and present and future. I've always sort of thought that, but couldn't put it into words necessarily that fantastically. But going back to doing the MA course at Sussex, which is 2 years part-time, 98 to 2000, and inevitably we had to write some poems, and I'm not a poet, but I thought, what can I write about? And so I wrote a small number, half a dozen or so poems, just about visual memories from childhood, and wondering why they've stayed with me. And one of them was of, I know it was about 10 or so, and a junior school trip out to the local countryside, which would have been like a big hill down the road or something like that. But it's exciting, isn't it? We got on the coach and we went on probably 4 miles out of town or 5 miles, and went somewhere, and I asked Mr. Wright was in charge of us. He was the headmaster of the school, and I asked if I could make a drawing in his sketchbook. And so did Andrew Ayton, and Andrew made a fantastic drawing. And I was told off because I made a drawing and I hadn't asked permission. I know I had. I was such a timid little boy. I wouldn't have just done it. And so that trauma stuck with me. I made this drawing when I was 10. I was told off about. So, but I could see it. I could vaguely see the drawing, maybe 1% of it in my memory. So having written a poem. I'm not sure if it comes up later now, the poem. But I decided to reproduce the drawing decades later, which made me think about in teaching terms. One could be teaching life drawing or working from the still life. And you're teaching the students how to look and see and measure and make a mark on the paper to record what they're seeing. And that split second from the observation to the mark on the paper, that split second, maybe it could be 10 years, or 20 years, or 30 years in this case. So that allowed me to keep making these drawings in my obsessive way, and then filling up a sketchbook, it's page 16, and just making these drawings to accompany the poem. And it was supposed to be just a drawing project, but I couldn't resist getting some paints out towards the end of the project. And actually, I made some larger paintings on canvas, but I couldn't find the images of those. They're probably on slides, not on digital images. And here, actually printing off the poem and collaging it, gluing it back into the drawing, and photocopies of the drawing, and drawing on top of that, and painting on top of that. So that interest in the visual and drawing and painting, and words I've written or previously words I've found, allowing those things to connect somehow. A much more recent photograph of these, going into the countryside and making drawings, and as you saw briefly in the video that we saw at the beginning, what I call psychogeographic drawing, and to intend to keep moving, to keep walking and drawing, and not to stand still and draw that pretty little view that might end up on the chocolate box. I say that slightly tentatively because I'm aware that in the video I am stopping. You can't help but stop. And I've done this exercise several times with students at Northbrook and then at West End. I was doing some teaching, and everyone would stop at some point, and then I keep moving, keep drawing. But I found in teaching those sessions, sometimes I just start to write notes down, which probably initially was a note to remind me of what to say when I get the students together as a group at the end of that drawing session. And then I found I was writing things down that wasn't information to give to others, but just for myself. And then in typing up those words, in this case would be in the order they appear in the book. This is the back of the book, from left to right. But as I wrote them, I would just open any page on the back of the sketchbook. Just letting chance intervene as well, a thought that comes into the head, or to the mind, that is or is not written down, but written down in any order on the reverse of the concertina sketchbook. So that's slightly letting go of the control, and just to see what would happen. But on the front of the sketchbook, it's going to be things like this, because if you really are moving, there could be a certain degree of bobbing up and down, as it were, depending on the terrain that you're walking on, or whatever you're observing, it's changing because you are moving. Even if it's still, you are moving. And just going with that mark making, and occasionally stopping and taking a rubbing of the surface as well. You can't really do that. Keep walking. Occasionally some text coming in. I think this one is out at West End, in one of the gardens there, and making a rubbing of a sort of manhole cover type thing, a drain cover. but actually bringing that sketchbook back to the studio, and either just leaving it as it is, it's a great pile of books in the studio, or sometimes to continue working into the sketchbook, and that was linking to that not unusual practice of the artist going out into the landscape, making those drawings, coming back to the studio, and then making the subsequent paintings. And I found that my thinking was becoming more, well, it's 50-50. Obviously it's important what I see and remember here, etc., outside, then coming back to the studio. But that's an environment in itself. And whether it's quiet, or perhaps some music is playing in there. In fact, the show with Tobias, I was eventually making paintings whilst listening to his music, which I'll come back to a little bit later on. But in the studio, which is upstairs, so 6 months ago, and working into one of the sketchbooks with some sketch. I think it's the one I've just been showing you some stills from. So it's good to take the photographs or do some scanning, because once you start painting, you can completely wreck a book that you should have just left the drawings as they were, or come up with some interesting paintings as well. And this is purposely all over the place, but it is on purpose. Coming back to the show that was in the project space a few weeks back, I wanted to bring the studio into notionally into the gallery space, but I was trying not to think of it as a gallery space. The problem with a gallery can be one gets very precious and ends up thinking white cube thoughts, lovely white walls and everything's carefully placed, and nice big spaces between everything. And there might be some signage, but not too much. But I wanted to make that space more of my studio. It's literally above that room. So I put down, I bought some very big rolls of paper, again from C-Wax, of partridge green. They don't pay me to say this, it's just a brilliant place to go and buy your art materials. And then I glued together some of these big rolls of Fabriano cartridge paper, painted it grey, and then laid it down on the floor. So that's obviously just starting. When that was dry, it could go underneath the tables, up against the window. And then carry on painting. So the paint would go on the floor, perhaps more than usual. And ideally it doesn't, because it's expensive stuff, isn't it? It shouldn't really be on the floor, it should be on the canvas or wherever. But I decided I would make the paintings on the floor. Whereas I generally make paintings, they're on the wall, and it's oil paint, and they're upright. They might be on the easel sometimes. So because the work was on the floor, I used acrylic paints because they dry a lot quicker than oils. And in painting the edges of the canvas, they didn't have stretchers on. So initially it's the white of the primer on the canvas, sometimes on sheets of paper, and then adding the colours, which you can see there. So the floor became a painting, but also retaining my interest in drawing and collage. So next to where I'm often sitting next to the kettle, possibly on Instagram. So that space where the kettle is, and it might be that a coffee bag or a tea bag goes on the floor, or I've picked up an invite for a show here. So one of Michelle's exhibitions tomorrow, full colour. So those could be just on that tabletop, and the rest of things will fall on the floor. So I glued those on the floor, and as objects are moved around the room, just drawing around. This is over months, almost a year, of just drawing around objects on the floor as well. So this grey, big sheet of grey, painted grey paper that was almost the whole size of the studio. Sheet of paper, I think, about 3.5 metres square. That's what was rolled up and brought down to the show here. And then in preparing for the show in the project space next door, initially just bringing some sketchbooks down, and I think this is the day that we started to install the show, but over the previous few months I'd sometimes sneak in there in between shows and photograph some of the pieces just in that space as well. But yeah, so bringing the work into the project space and trying not to be too precious about that space as an art gallery. And that was, so that's some of the paintings. Yes, some of the paintings on the floor, as I said earlier, were made working on canvas, and others were on 6 found pieces of wood, which I think were maybe part of some IKEA furniture or something. Because they're all identical in size and cut out perfectly, pieces of hardboard. So I'd work on those as well. And a section of one of those appeared printed on the CD disc you saw earlier on in the talk as well. But with the paintings, I'll go back one as well. With the paintings becoming simpler and just painting bands of colour. So in the top left-hand corner of that particular slide, there's a portion of the painting that was more typical of what I was doing with oils beforehand, more sort of gestural art-making kind of painting. But then I found in listening to Tobias's music, which he composed from looking at my drawings, and then he could send me files of those initial pieces of music, which he made with his synesthetic condition of relating colours and shapes and marks to sounds. You either have that condition or you don't. You can't invent it really. So yeah, so his musical compositions, which are very much sort of school of Philip Glass, minimalist type music. And then I found, months later, I could play these soundtracks in the studio. And then how do I allow this to influence how I make the paintings without planning it, really? And I found these sort of stripy paintings started to happen as well. Some of the paintings were made on sheets of paper. So where you see that piece coming down, which is the cool air, which is from that poem type piece of text that I typed up and could print off in different colours and different sized fonts and so on the computer at home, using those as collage. But the paper itself, when I made the floor covering, it was too wide, so I could cut some off, and rather than wasting that paper, I decided to make some long paintings I could just hang from the wall, which later on became catalogue covers, but that wasn't the intention at the time. And yeah, the paintings that I made, all but, I made 6, so this is 5 of the 6, and yeah, these were made on the floor, hence those colourful stripy marks on the floor. So, I mean, this is in the last year, so which feels to me almost like brand new work, which I don't still fully understand it yet, and I know there's more to do, which will take time. And I think ideally to simplify more, but I find that difficult to simplify without starting to get too much into the physical usage of the paint as well. What also appeared in that show were 3 pieces of board that are purposely, they're called balanced boards, and you can stand on them and I'd probably fall off, but I'd never heard of balanced boards before, but my granddaughter's got one, and I thought, oh, I want one of those, and so I bought 3, and when you get them, they're already painted white, so they're kind of primed ready. But the thinking behind those was I wanted the work to come off of the wall. Again, it's slightly anti-white cube, modernistic art space. And let's let the paintings come off the wall. But for this combined piece, I took so it's what looks like a poem, High Downhill, which are just what I wrote on the back of the concertina book, and typed up in exactly the order that I'd written them as they appeared on the back of the sketchbook, and but subdividing that, so again, so it looks like a poem because there's 5 lines, stanzas of 5 lines. There's pure charts, then just enough lines to actually do that. And it was you might be wondering what's that scarf doing there? But a good way to keep off of Instagram is to knit. And I like to knit, and I only want to know how to do plain stitch, and I knit scarves. And for a few years, some amazing Irish wool, Donegal wool, really lovely stuff. And it wasn't until putting this show on, I thought, well, paintings look a bit like my scarves. It seems so obvious now. I just hadn't realised that. So I think this scarf, the show was only on for, it was 7 days, 7 or 8 days, something like that. And it was probably something like day 5 or 6. I had my scarf on, and I decided to add it to one of the sculptures. Not a sculpture at all, but it seems an interesting connection there as well. I almost put this in first. This is a watercolour from 1977. That's in my, I think it's the summer between the first and second year. I'm not sure now, but yeah. And there was an area of woodland near my mother's house on the sort of northern side of Shrewsbury, and it's where as kids we would go on our bikes, and you just play in this woodland, and the days when kids would just go off. I mean, we don't let our kids do that now, do we? Because dangers out there. But so it's always a special place, but not somewhere. You might be passing through to go to somewhere else. A place called Ormond Abbey, which was destroyed, obviously, many years ago. But yeah, it was a space where just the local kids would play, really. But that to me was my landscape, and always gets me thinking, why did I choose to be notionally a landscape painter? And so at the age of 17 and 18, being on a foundation course, and then deciding to apply for a fine art painting degree, and sort of identifying myself as, well, I'm a British landscape painter, because that's what we do. I mean, it sounds like a nonsense now, but I was still teaching, I would question the students, particularly on the degree course, thinking like that. But it just feels right somehow. But at that time, inevitably, at art college, one is having to go to lectures, art history lectures, and so on. And so, of course, we all had to love Cézanne, which I still do, but we're kind of obliged to love Cézanne's painting. And this is a Cézanne, the previous one, alas, isn't. But and if I only came across this image 7 or 8 months ago, I thought that looks a bit like my painting. Although I think we'll probably choose that one to hang on the wall at home. And yeah, I suppose that thing about a space and place being special in some way. So a show in Shrewsbury, I think of my hometown. I wasn't actually born there, but I think of it as my hometown, and I had a show in a gallery there, as you can see, in 2017, and Sundawn is the geographical area of where that woodland is.
So give me a quick reminder about time.
Okay. 2 hours. 10 minutes. And in fact, one of the poems, I wasn't back to say poems, I don't know why, I've written on the MA course. It's, again, it's sort of visual memory of a certain place, and then a feeling of some kind of, it sounds really corny, but some kind of energy about a particular space. And again, this was a space, when I went back the last time, which is probably about 15 years ago now, it's like, it's on the corner of a really busy, very dangerous road, and you can't really stop there. I found somewhere nearby to park, somewhere where I shouldn't have parked probably, but again, it's a kind of non-space. It's not a picturesque space. You don't go there to have a picnic, but I remember being there in about 1976 in Sundawn Woods, and so years later I sort of wrote this poem about being there, and well, about being there and about making the painting as well, so the mimicking fractured Cezanne-esque colour screens. Yeah, just thinking it through really, but usually thinking it through and making drawings and painting, and occasionally writing things down, which just got me thinking about as one gets older. Time is interesting, it's fascinating, and I came across this quotation by one of my favourite contemporary artists, Ian McKeever. In a way, the older you get, the earlier you go back. It sounds like a kind of contradiction almost. You draw on your past, it creeps into the work. That was a guide to a Whitechapel show. I've got a massive collection of Ian McKeever catalogues, but I was just leafing through his catalogues, and then I was writing something for the MA course, but I thought, well, if Ian can say this, then I can allow myself to think this as well, and if it seems illogical to be going back as you, in chronological terms, as you move forward in time, just in a logical sense, it doesn't make sense, but in a feeling and thought kind of sense, I think it does somehow. And so, in fact, for the show in Shrewsbury, I just started remaking these paintings about being in this space, which the locals would have known of because it's not too far out of town. And so this canvas, the actual real one, it's actually a bit bigger than that. It's still up in the studio, and just allowing myself to make these paintings, but very much using vague memory and amount of feelings, but also just going with the qualities of the paint. In this case, acrylic paints. And a show. It was the COVID year. I think it was like the second shutdown period, and people couldn't come in. We could go up to the studios. People couldn't come in. There wasn't a public space out there. It just wasn't possible to do that. And I was asked to put on a show of paintings because people could see the works as they walked past from the roadside. So there's still life here in Phoenix, though the public couldn't come in for a few weeks, maybe a few months, I can't remember now. And it just got me thinking about the paintings and actually memories and paintings made decades before, and then still kind of making them somehow, and then allowing myself to make them. And, it reminded me of it's a quotation from Neil Young for a live concert, and someone in the audience shouts out to ask for one of his classics, and he just shouts back, "It's all one song." So say, well, it doesn't matter what I sing. To me, it's just all one song, whether it's almost an unknown song that he hasn't even released, or something on an album that hasn't been listened to that much, through to a big hit. And I say, paintings, it's just all one song, really. And I did a similar sort of show, and this is the show at Coachworks Gallery, is now called 1980, so it's going back in time a bit more. And then, a couple of years ago, I was questioning what I was doing, but also looking at other people's work. And I've always loved art history, and I remember on the degree course, there's one of those strange fine art students who wrote the essay that was set to write, because a lot of the kids had to force it out of them. And I found I was looking at, this is a painted by Peter Rubens, and actually thinking about the composition and can artists compose anymore? And let's look at what these great names from the past can do. And I was just allowing that to influence my own paintings that I was making anyway. So, and also questioning why landscape, and why there are no figures in them. So I was just looking at other people's work and adding some shapes. And Antoine Watteau, an 18th century French painter, and this was I was just flicking through an art history book, I think, and he would. This was a painting made called "The Embarkation for Cythera," and it's a group of rich posh people arriving on this Greek island, the island of love, and you can't really see it in the reproduction. Out at sea, there's a little boat which has brought them in. It's delivered them to the island, and a later interpretation of the painting was that actually it's a bittersweet painting, because in fact the boat's still out there. It's going to take them away again. So on the right hand side is a statue of Venus amongst the foliage there. But something, it seemed to fit in with something about being cut off from the world in that time of COVID, and coming to the studio and not so many people around, and it's just weird outside. So I just allowed that imagery to influence these, often with paintings just made on, often from these trips to the friend's house and drawing in their garden. And believe it or not, there's that's the Venus statue there, which I think my daughter's told me off about. So it's about the male gaze. I said, no, it's not that. It's not always about the male gaze. And then still look at other people's work, and there's the Gainsborough painting of Mr. and Mrs. Andrews. I fascinated, just the whole story behind it and how it could be interpreted of it. The landowner, with not just the land he owns, but the woman he owns, that sort of ideally old-fashioned, out-of-date way of thinking. But I found in looking at the painting, this reproduction doesn't do it justice at all. You see that painting in the National Gallery, and I thought that's mind-blowing painting. And I think it's roughly that size, perhaps a little bit smaller. And so there's a part of me that is interested art historically and in terms of how one would interpret the painting and the relationship between landscape and the beginnings of capitalism and making money, and if you didn't make excess money, you didn't need, the farmer would lose the land. But then the peasants might be moved off the land, and the land is being landscaped. So there's a whole lot of political and social crucial information behind that kind of imagery, I found that was almost rubbing up against the fact that aesthetically this is just the most incredible painting, whatever it's about or however we might interpret it now. It's a loaded painting. So I made lots of versions of this painting, and then this is a painting by Titian, Perseus and Andromeda, in the 16th century, in the Wallace collection in London. And I hit upon this because during one of those COVID periods, there'd been the Titian exhibition at the National Gallery, and we could go in and walk around in a crocodile, as it were. But I was working on a painting in the studio, and my eldest daughter popped in one day, and she was doing something at the table, and it's such a rubbish painting. So when I went to the next day, just by myself, I sort of realised how awful this painting was, and there was a postcard of the Titian paintings up on the wall in the studio, and so I thought I'll just take those figures and put those in as well. So, and that was the final version, went on canvas of probably 3/4 of that size. So more recently, this sort of questioning of the painting and what the subject matter is. Which brings us to now, and you may have noticed in the corridors you came in, an exhibition literally went up today, opens on Thursday evening, kind of officially throughout November in the window space. A series of works by 10 members of the Phoenix linked to works that they've seen in our Brighton Museum and Art Gallery. The image by Perdita Sinclair, who's a painter up on the top floor. But the idea for this show, which is the first one I've curated, I was thinking, have I not done it before? When you get students to put a show on, they just do as you say. When you create a show with fellow artists, it's a completely different ball game altogether. But the idea for this was from 2017, when I took this photograph of a painting by Gainsborough in our museum and art gallery. That's a better reproduction of it. But I'd gone to the gallery to see there's a New York School paintings in there, and I remember looking at these great big canvases, and somewhere off out through a doorway there was this tiny little painting saying, "Hey, look at me, I'm a modern painting as well." I remember going up and saying, "Well, what is this painting?" Metaphorically speaking, waving at me, and there was this Gainsborough painting, and I thought it'd be interesting. Later on, I thought it'd be interesting to invite fellow artists from the Phoenix and get them to go along to the Museum Art Gallery and respond to something to make their own artwork. So this is in the corridor outside now, and this little, well, it's a small oval painting, it looks big there. That's outside, but hung in a space that's not so obvious to see on purpose. So this, just a couple of my paintings from the show that's in the space outside. And I continue to photograph things, especially words in the street, and to make my painting studio strategy card out of them. When times are a bit bumpy, you have to go with it. It's a necessary part of the journey. Can't gliding smoothly too much of the time. That's the end.
Any questions? I'd like to ask you, Geoff, you know, you talk about yourself as a landscape painter, but actually you didn't show us so many paintings, you know what I mean? So I'm asking you, are you thinking of yourself as a writer or a collagist or a painter primarily? Because within that, you see lots of thinking, not so much of the outcome.
I think of myself as a painter who essentially works from landscape-based imagery. And that might be something I hooked onto so young, it's just gets stuck somehow.
But I'm sort of interested in the fact that you didn't show us so many paintings. That talk was dominated by drawings and thought processes, and you're saying you're not poets, but poems and writing.
I know.
Is that a sort of shyness there going on? Because your studio is absolutely chock full of paintings. It's all you can't see, you can't see the wall for paint.
200 unsold masterpieces.
Well, of course, and plus the 100 you destroyed the other week, you said. So, I'm sort of interested in the fact that you didn't really show us your journey through paint.
I think through preparing for this was only recently. I think just that seeing all the other stuff I do that maybe I don't think about so much. So I could easily have done a slideshow that was just paintings. And maybe if that was represented in 3 months, I would take lots out and put other stuff in. It might be 80% painting.
If you don't see yourself as solely as a painter, I mean, you do your painting here, but from that very first slide with the list of activities, you engage with other things as well, aren't you?
So that list, and that was from with Tobias, who writes the music, is just thinking about the content, and it's almost like a subhead, literally a subheading of what was going on. But it was in preparing this that it's like, oh, that's what I do.
And I've done one of these talks, and it's very difficult to fit everything in, isn't it?
Well, of course.
I got halfway through with it.
We've had the other day, I was talking to Louise about the PowerPoint and say, I've done it, I've just got to just do a little tweaking at the end of it, and I think I've got about 50 slides. And she said, oh, that's perfect, that's just right. And went home and tweaked it, and I think there's 70 slides now. So, but that's just me getting to know about it all, probably. And probably a slight element of rushing it in curating and hanging this show and the organisation of that, and writing a big fat essay on that. So 2 sort of significant things, and 3 with the recent exhibition. Perhaps business or something. I've just perhaps thrown too much in. I don't know. I'm looking forward to Friday, because we've got the viewing of the show.
Thursday.
Well, that's on Thursday evening, but on Friday it's all done. So I'm going to have a big line on Friday morning. So, thank you all for coming.
Thank you.